The truth about alchemy's history and essence is a very layered and complex story that I will now elucidate to you. I will tell you the history of it as well as the spiritual elements, and I'll tell you the history of 19th and 20th century occultists and how they interpreted it, as well as how historians both then and now have interpreted it. And finally, my own theories on the matter. In this series, I will explain to you the history of alchemy across civilizations and centuries. Let us begin. Alchemy is a complicated subject. It is one of the hardest subjects to research in the whole history of the occult, and it requires a lot of explanation. Here we go. First of all, alchemy exists in 5 main branches: Indian, Chinese, Egyptian, Arabic, and European. Indian and Chinese alchemy each developed independently, although some think that Indian alchemy may have slightly influenced Arabic alchemy. Meanwhile, Egyptian alchemy was directly adopted by medieval Arabic Muslims, and it was passed on through trade to medieval Christian Europeans. In Shannon Grimes's book, Becoming Gold, Zosimos of Panopolis, and the Alchemical Arts in Roman Egypt, she explains the historical background of alchemy, including who the early alchemists were, as well as the chemical and spiritual components of alchemy. She describes how the early alchemists were temple priests in Egypt, whose job was to make statues of gods for worship. That these statues were believed to contain the actual spirit of the god within it. It was the job of these artisan priests to smelt and color these statues and enchant them with the energies of the chosen god they were supposed to represent. This enchanting was known as the opening of the mouth ritual. Upon completing this ritual, the statue was thought to become alive with the spirit of the god whose energies were summoned into its material body. The process of doing this was marked by having the statues be dyed different colors in succession. It would go from black to white, then from white to yellow, and finally from yellow to either purple or red. The reason being that the dyes they used could look like a purplish red. These dyes were thought to represent different spiritual stages of a process of transformation of the artisan priest's spirit. They would argue with each other over the nature of whether or not they could truly transform one material to another, but they all agreed that it was possible to dye the colors and transform themselves spiritually through the process of initiatic magic, which they would perform on themselves during the process of making the statue for the public to venerate. It wasn't until later centuries that Arabic and European alchemists thought that for sure you could transform lead into gold or silver. The truth is that the original Egyptian alchemists themselves were not all sure about this proposition. It should also be noted that the history of alchemy is also the history of the development of the various modern chemical implements. Tools that are now seen in every chemistry laboratory can be found across the history of alchemy, whether from Egypt, Arabia, or Europe. The development of beakers, vials, test tubes, and every other chemical implement can be found in the history of alchemy. The reason for this is that just like how astrology is the precursor to the more modern and base science of astrology, alchemy is the part metaphysical and part physical science that acted as a precursor to the far less spiritual and more material modern science of chemistry. To put it simply, alchemy was on the one hand primitive chemistry, and on the other hand an occult science of spiritual transformation. This is the way it first developed in the Egyptian context, and while it is not mainstream for scholars to say so, this is what it continued to be for the rest of pre-modern history, until modern psychoanalysis and materialist scholarship had changed and obscured the true meaning of these ancient and cryptic exercises and formulas, as well as by modern occultists who claim to know what the ancients were up to, yet few actually know.